We're live. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm gonna be speaking in English today, just because I'm gonna be interviewing somebody that herself and her whole community speaks in English. But don't worry, because I'm going to be translating it to Spanish when it's over, and I'm gonna be reposting it with the subtitles in Spanish. But welcome, everyone. I'm so excited that you're here. Today we have an amazing guest, somebody that I admire. I'm literally one of her biggest fans. I started following her work ever since she literally began here in Instagram. And a lot of my work nowadays is influenced by her wisdom. And that is Nicole Lepera from the Holistic Psychologist. I'm writing it here so you guys know what we're talking about. Okay. Let me invite her. Okay, here she is. In the chat, where are you hearing us from? I love to know where you're from. Okay. Hi.
Hello. I thought I had this measured correctly. I didn't. Give me 1 second. Let me fix my height so my head's not cut off. All right, I'm back. Hello.
I'm so excited, so happy to have you here. A lot of people from my community know you because I recommend your work all the time. I have a program that it's called Más Paz Mental, which in English is More Peace of Mind. And I have been giving it for 6 years now. And I think like 3 years ago, I realized that there was one thing missing, and it was the ego, which is one of the most important things that we need to learn about when we're healing, because a lot of times we think we're setting boundaries, but we're actually operating from the ego. We're controlling, we want power, and that cannot be called setting boundaries because it hurts relationships and it hurts ourselves. It doesn't help. So one of my models, which is the ego, is literally completely influenced by your work. And I mentioned you through the whole model. So a lot of people now are listening to you and hearing us speak. I'm very excited because I've been talking about your work for years. Well, how are you?
I'm so good. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me, welcoming me into your beautiful community. Thank you and community for hosting this in English, and all of the work that, of course, you're going to do behind the scenes afterwards, Stephanie, to make sure that it gets translated. I'm such a fan of what you do. I remember we really did connect very early on both of our social media journeys, and at that time speaking, about the things that happen behind the closed door, I know was really not something that was so commonly done. So I want to just celebrate you and how far you've come, your work, how impactful I'm seeing just, the movement in your own community is. So thank you for joining me on this crazy ride that is social media. It is truly an honor to have this opportunity, like I said, again, just to remain connected through all of the growing, and to be here, especially talking about things around the holidays. I'm still inspired. So many members are still talking about the workshop that you gifted Self Healer Circle with, around a version of this exact conversation, right? How do we understand our limits? How do we begin to assert our wants and needs? How do we understand that deeper self as opposed to the ego self, essentially, that so many of us have become used to?
I'm very excited. Yeah, I've for those that don't know, I've taught already 2 workshops at the Self Healer Circle, and I was very excited to be there. And one of the things we talked about was, yes, how to be more proactive in your life. And why did we name this live How to Self-Love Through the End of the Year? So I don't know if you relate to what I'm gonna say, but when I had my private practice, I don't have it anymore because, like you, I'm completely focused in building the community and doing more group work. But when I did have it, I remember that my private practice got packed at this season. Like December was like emails and calls, and people wanted to come in. And when I listened to the stories and I joined the other person's world, it was incredible how the expectation that this season has about who do you have to be and the successes you should already have, the whole resolutions thing, the expectations of of hosting and welcoming and being some type of having like some extra responsibilities and some type of hosting role with your family members, and not speaking up and saying yes to everything and give, it makes a lot of people feel like they have to abandon themselves in order to be accepted and feel part of the family. And on the other hand, I also see that this is a season that we're expected to be happy. It's the happiest time of the year. That's how it's called. So when we're not happy and we're sad because we're going through grief because somebody passed away, or because we're getting a divorce, or because we moved to another place and we're still adapting. So when we're not feeling that happiness that the whole world is expecting us to feel, we start judging ourselves very, very harshly, which doesn't help. So I want to know a little bit about how have you, as a psychologist and leader of your own community, what do you see happening in this season?
I think never is it as close to the surface, all of our conditioning. I think everything that we're talking about, all of these roles, these internal expectations, what we expect ourselves to think, to feel, how we expect ourselves to show up, how externally a lot of those expectations are validated by messaging that we get. I think then the reality for a lot of us who celebrate the holidays in some, kind of whatever that looks like for each of us individually, I think this time of year comes with visits home or back to families of origin, right? Where all of this conditioning got created in the first place. So never is it more activated. Never are many of us more challenged, have that deeper wounding, those emotional moments come up, become really present again to the habits and patterns that we might be having had some success in terms of breaking on our own, separating, but now here we are to navigate and deal with family members. So similarly, I saw in my practice and now in my community, we actually inspired by this conversation, this exact fact or experience that many are having. We have different kind of topical boards for people to connect with. And a lot of the members specifically requested a holiday support board to go up so that there can be some relating and sharing. And again, for many different reasons, I think the conversation that we're really having here is, where do all of these expectations come from? They come from, again, the earliest relationships, typically, in my opinion, how we had to show up to get our needs met, to maintain our safety. Some of us even develop a sense of identity. And now we continue with those internalized expectations. I do think a lot of it comes from the outside, this idea that we should feel a certain way during this time of year or show up a certain way with an endless amount of to-do list and even consumerism, things that we need to spend our time, attention, and money on to, evidence this achievement or to be a loving partner or friend or whatever it is. So saying that to say, I think, again, for a lot of us, it is challenging, and giving ourselves, I think, the grace and compassion to maybe understand why this portion of time or certain relationships are creating the challenge. Then, of course, we could talk about some resources and how to begin to navigate it.
And what about, and also I see a lot of people reflecting back on the year. So if we started the year with a list of New Year's resolutions and goals, and we feel like we didn't got through them, which, by the way, I don't remember the exact percentage, but it was huge. It's like more than 50% of, a lot more don't get through the resolutions. So, and when you reflect back and you feel like you promised yourself something, and we talk a lot about that, and what you promise yourself. So if you promise yourself to attain certain types of goals and you ended up not following through, you kind of feel like a failure. And I wanted to talk a lot about that as well, because that's one of your main topics, the self-promise, and how to really make small promises and be able to follow through, so we can construct some kind of how do you say it, self trust, which is so important in this journey.
I first want to normalize I think the very natural, instinctive, even human tendency that we all have in ourselves. When we come to the conclusion, because life is imploding, exploding around us, because we just get to that point where we determine and set the intention that things need to change. Usually it's, I mean, not for all of us, but for a lot of us, it's out of a suffering of sorts, right? We can't tolerate life continuing as it is. So we need to shift. We need to create change. And I think it's very instinctive and natural, especially when it comes from that suffering place. I'm in pain and I can't imagine this pain continuing. So I will begin to show up differently. It's our human instinct is, well, let me get to that place of relief quicker. So let me try to overhaul my life. And again, when externally, right, we're hearing messaging, new start, new you, right? This idea that an overhaul is completely possible, that you're going to wake up starting January 1st, maybe the 2nd for some of us, and all of your daily habits are going to look completely different. Before long, you're going to be thinking differently, feeling differently, doing differently, and then on your way you go to succeed or to fulfill this unrealistic expectation that we've now set for ourselves. And again, while I do think it's really natural when we're in pain, we want that relief to come sooner. When maybe we even hear you, myself, other people talking about all these different new small things that we could do every day, it can be really tempting to create a long list. Though we have to understand, and I would see this in my private practice, and one of the most frustrating spaces to be was stuck between insight and new actions. And not only is it frustrating, it can be really disempowering and demoralizing. We could feel really shameful, the many of us who have maybe set commitments to create an overhaul in our life and haven't been able to white knuckle it past a couple of days or past a couple of weeks. And the physiological reason for that is, while we are incredibly capable of imagining a life that, even if each of you were to take a second right now and imagine a completely different life and completely different habits starting tomorrow, we have that ability. Though when it comes to our body's physiological shifting into the unknown or the newness or the unexpectation, we don't know what happens next. We might have an idea that I'll feel better, my relationships will feel differently, I'll feel more connected, or whatever it may be. To our body and our nervous system in particular, it will register simply as new. And what new means to our nervous system, or what it opens up the possibility for, I should say, is threat. We don't actually get to predict or know. We can't play that tape forward yet, as we can with all of the other habits and patterns that we've been repeating, some of us for decades. So while we can change, our body is inherently stressed anytime we move out of those habitual pathways. So the further, really just simply, we move out into newness, this hypothetical overhaul of life, the more we're causing a stress to our physiological body. And if we can't tolerate the new thoughts, the new emotions that many of us have become present to, the new boundaries, the new dynamics, the new shifts from other people as they begin to experience us differently, before long, we're right back relying on those old habitual patterns. So the concept that you're referencing, that we talk quite often about in Self-Healer Circle, is what I call a small daily promise, where we're harnessing the reality that change will come with resistance. Many of us do have to teach our bodies how to tolerate the stress of change without relying on those often self-sabotaging, self-neglectful habits. And the byproduct of not only creating small new choices, it becomes not only feasible and possible for us to tolerate small amounts of stress as we do that new thing each and every day. To bring up your beautiful wisdom, what we're doing psychologically, and in my opinion, more beneficially to ourselves, is we're rebuilding that trust. We're rebuilding that possibility of showing up in support of our intentions. And that is the trust that then keeps us keeping those small promises and building on new small promises over time.
I love it. In my mind, it kept replaying something that one of my mentors, her name is Michelle Vitale. She's part of your Health Healer Circle, by the way. She loves you. And one of the things she tells me about is cultivating capacity, which is, and you do it like that. You cannot go from one place to the other place in 1 second, or maybe maybe you can, but then you're going to self-sabotage again because it's going to feel so threatening in your body, as you said. And to the contrary, if you do it in small steps, I mean, and a step can be a self-promise can be, I'm going to not judge myself while I grieve. That could be a promise. That could be in itself a promise. I'm gonna, or not even not judge myself. It could be I'm gonna observe myself when judgment comes up, and I'm going to release it without judging myself for judging myself.
Yes.
If you get the point, that could be a self-promise, and it's hard. It's something that sometimes it feels like it's very small, but small can also be very, very challenging. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that maybe it's small because we're not, I don't know, we're not doing something that the society usually applauds and recognize as something big, but for us and for our nervous system and for our growth is huge. And I feel that that's what we need to start recognizing so we can be a lot more self-compassionate and build upon those little successes.
What you're sharing here, Stephanie, is so incredibly powerful because you're acknowledging the reality that these habits and patterns, as I call them in my new book, actually, I term them, they're neurobiologically wired. If we really want to simplify what that means is they have these well-worn pathways in our mind with all the repeated thoughts, meanings, beliefs that we have about ourselves, others, our place in the world. They're mapped onto well-worn physiological pathways in our body where we're used to feeling in these particular ways. And the reality, we can come to that point of suffering, decide things want to shift and change, hear this beautiful tool of, oh, small promises, it's going to help me work past this resistance. And a lot of us, I think, go into that journey with an expectation that those pathways will just magically disappear, that we won't be met with that same critical voice, those same old beliefs that we're unworthy or unlovable. We won't be met with the same feelings in my body, discomfort, sadness, grief, as you mentioned earlier, anger, upset, things that maybe some of us haven't been present to and now are becoming fully present, that we won't be met with the almost what feels like compulsive desire to act in the same ways that maybe we validated for decades over time don't produce the consequences that we want. And so this wise kind of piece of understanding comes when we remove that expectation that all of that wiring essentially immediately goes away. And I love that concept of, is it building or creating the capacity? Because what we're really creating the capacity for in these, I think, most empowering moments that we gift ourselves with on our journey is the capacity to, I think you even said the word, observe ourselves, witness. I would call this the capacity to be conscious. Because again, if we have this expectation that when, especially a word like consciousness, which is, I think, become quite a buzzword, I'm very grateful because it's a very important topic, concept, and practice. I think a lot of people think what consciousness means or the goal of meditation, which is really just a practice of being conscious. It doesn't have to be in the traditional sense of, cross-legged in a quiet room for 30, 45 minutes at a time at all. It's consciousness is truly the ability to be in our own self-awareness. And that's the capacity that many of us are building, that, in my opinion, that's the foundation to create any possible change we want. Because now our habits and patterns are still there, that subconscious mind, all that neurobiological wiring. What is also now online in terms of our physiological brain, and this is the most powerful part of our brain that allows us to not only imagine that future that's different than our past, though mobilize energy, actualize those choices, essentially create it, is when we're in that seat of conscious awareness. And so when we're building that capacity without the expectation that all this subconscious mind goes away, because it won't, what will be different over time is we will begin to power up that powerful part of our brain that can say, okay, I see you, old critical voice. I understand that you were trying to protect me at one time, or even deeply unlovable belief about self. I see you that you came from a time and a place where it wasn't an accurate representation of how things were. I feel you in my body. I feel the desire to scream, to yell, to detach, to hide, right? I might even do that in some occasions, but what is different is I give myself the choice in each and every moment where I have that capacity to be conscious to say, wait a minute, I'm going to remove the focus from those unhelpful thoughts. I know where this spiral goes. I'm going to learn a new way to physiologically self-soothe or to reach out for another grounded, supportive, safe individual whose nervous system can quite literally help me soothe my own body or comfort me. And I'm going to make a new choice in how I ultimately show up in this moment.
I love it. I love it. And it's a journey. I want to emphasize that it's a journey, and it's not a linear journey. And it gets better with practice. And I feel that that's one of the hardest thing, like to actually sustain the practice through your whole life. Because even me, so if I don't practice it, I love this metaphor. So I'm gonna give it to the people that are watching right now. And we're in Instagram right now. So I imagine the people that are here right now probably use a lot of social media. So Instagram has an algorithm. What happens when you suddenly see something sponsored in your page? You're just scrolling, and then suddenly, and you see dentist 5 miles away, which is probably weird because you talked about you needing to go to a dentist like 5 minutes ago. So it's like, are they hearing me? Okay. What happens if you click on that ad? Probably the next week you're gonna have like 10 more ads about different dentists in your neighborhoods or things you need to buy to fix your teeth. And our brain works in very similar ways. And that's why I think the people who build social media are genius, because they literally are kind of copying how our brain works. And it works like that. And I tell this in my program, if you always go to eat with your friends, and then suddenly you start hearing how long distance relationships, they just don't work because the person that travels is definitely gonna start being with somebody else. And then your husband or wife comes home, or your partner, and tells you that they need to go to Dubai to sign the work that he's been working for months so that it comes through. What is the first thing that's going to come to your mind? And it's not going to be, I'm so excited, we're finally going to be able to buy a house. No, it's going to be, okay, this person is going to go and it's going to be with somebody else, and now you get jealous, and now you start making stories in your mind. And if you click those stories, then you can win an Oscar probably. And so it works in very similar ways. We start hearing something, the thought comes up, and if you click on the thought, which means you believe it as the truth, then more stories very similar to that are going to come up. And I don't know what you think about that metaphor, but I always explain it, and it helps so much to understand the clicking part of it.
Yes, I love it. And what you're beautifully describing, I think the deeper, really wise teaching in this is you're illustrating how subjective all of our individual realities are and can be. Meaning there is all of this filtering of experience, interpreting or meaning making of experience that's happening behind the scenes at all times. And if we want to go really back in time, and so I think by the time we get to adulthood, let me start there first, a lot of us don't feel, and we don't, in some really like logistical ways, have a sense. We become merged with the particular meanings and filters that we've been applying, the large majority of us, for the better part, if not the entirety of our lives, right? We become our beliefs. We don't see all of this behind the scenes events we do truly feel map onto the emotional reality, right? It was the dishes that caused me to feel mad, not all the interpretation that I've done behind the scenes about what the dishes made, let alone where those interpretations and meanings once came from. And so what you're really, again, illustrating is the fact that we are very much an active creator, subjectifying our reality. Two of us, you and I, are living the same experience, and we will have a different takeaway. We would probably even describe our conversation differently, right? There's not a moment or a transcript we can refer to and be like, oh, well, here's objectively what happened, and here's how your interpretation is wrong. And because that's not how the computer that is our mind and is very much mimicked, I think, in many of these technology algorithms now, it's not how it works. And then the empowering part of this is not only that this is happening and we can become an observer or conscious to the meanings that are causing or contributing to the emotional reactivity, and then ultimately what we do to try and navigate that reactivity, we can become conscious to the possibility that these beliefs were formed not to minimize what beliefs are, because they are very powerful interpretations that our mind has gained certainty on around certain aspects of ourselves. They're grounded in our physiological experiences, things that actually happen to us at a time and a place. So at that time and that place, they also too were not objective reality. And when many of us, as we have created and repeated certain interpretations of the events around us from a very early age, particularly from birth until about age 9, we are limited in our ability to make sense of the world in a much more mature, nuanced way, where we can understand all of the different reasons that contribute to people's inactions or actions or inactions, consistent care for us or inconsistent care, outright abuse or neglect at times. And when we begin to assign very personalized meanings, interpretations, many of us continue then our journey with these deep-rooted beliefs that certain things that happened or didn't happen mean something deep and intrinsic, inherent about who I am at my core. And then we continue to march forward, applying this filter outside of our awareness, operating as if it is our objective truth and reality.
Completely. And that ties with things are not personal. You know, a lot of times we take others' behavior, their decisions, like it has something to do with us, and truly it has to do with them. So when we understand everything that Nicole just said, we can be a lot more compassionate with ourselves and with others as well. And because we understand that everybody has their own struggles, their own traumas, their own defense mechanisms, their own needs, their own lack of skills that they cannot apply because they don't even have it. So they apply what they already know, and which in this society most likely is very destructive. So we become more compassionate in these interactions.
Absolutely. And the reason why I often will talk about the underlying physiological drivers or even this development of where our beliefs come from is in hope that, as all of you are listening, right, the next time that habit surfaces, whatever it might be, that critical belief, like that emotional moment of reactivity, maybe that just habitual way you show up in a relationship without limits, without boundaries, right? The next time that surfaces, instead of shaming ourselves or believing ourselves to be broken and incapable of creating change, that we're able to see and understand differently. Not to say that the action or reaction, I should say, will change, but what could possibly change is more an internal process, as you're describing, which is compassion. I can understand why I did what I did, even if what I did was hurtful. I said and did things I didn't mean. I might have removed myself from opportunity for connection, or when someone needed me in any given moment, right? Or maybe I self-betrayed. I didn't uphold that new boundary that I'm trying to stay committed to keeping. I can understand why that old habit resurfaced at that time. And I think as we begin, which is another process of embodying those small moments of compassion, not to say that the criticism won't come, the self-shaming won't come, but that empowered choice, like we were talking about earlier, to say, okay, I'm not going to focus. That's not the reality right now of what's happening. Often then comes the possibility of extending that compassion to other people and their moments of habitual reactivity or disconnection, or a dynamic that they're bringing or co-creating in a relationship, their side of the street, if you will, right? It allows us to then, I think, extend compassion outward. And compassion, as another concept I talk a lot about in the new book, is so incredibly healing. Not only, right, does it allow us to shift from shaming, from criticizing, into maybe even embodied action and choice, in any given moment, that moment of feeling compassionate to ourselves generates to really simplify it, a positive healing internal energy that can help coordinate our physiological systems, make us physically healthier, and it can help us to be emotionally more regulated as well. Because a lot of the habits and patterns that we're repeating are causing us suffering, though in my opinion, not more so than this critical, shaming, internalized voice where we are tearing ourselves down. We are excluding ourselves by not even giving ourselves the opportunity to maybe even see the love and support that is available to us, especially at this time of year when we all need and want and have an expectation of feeling together. When we are separating ourselves, and a lot of it's not even happening outside, it's what we're doing in our mind, excluding and separating ourselves. We are causing ourselves not only physical harm, but emotional harm. So being able to be compassionate in those moments really has deep rooted benefits for ourselves. And then of course, if you can imagine showing up in that space of compassion, it's going to change that energy that we're sharing with those around us.
Yeah, I feel there's no way to grow from whatever's happening if there's no compassion. Because if there's no compassion, most likely there's self-judgment. And with self-judgment, we're rejecting reality. We are rejecting ourselves. And as we know, when we're in rejection of what's going on, there's no energy to advance, to see what learnings there are. And I feel like everything that we do in life gives us information. It gives us valuable information, even mostly when we act in ways that doesn't align with the people that we actually are and want to be. And those are the moments that we can retrieve valuable information to create some kind of strategy within ourselves to evolve. But we're unable to do that, to focus that energy there in evolving, in healing, if we're focusing the energy in self-judging, in just rejecting the situation as a whole, and being like really having like a very self-destructive dialogue. We don't want to do that. So I definitely agree that one of the bases of healing is self-compassion.
And hearing energy, I love this idea, and rejecting, because something I want to touch on too, we're talking about, right, self-love through the end of the year, self-love in general, self-compassion in general. I think we can quickly hear or define anything from the concept of self-compassion to self-love, how to show up in self-love or self-compassion. I think we can define it to mean positive, right? To love ourselves is to feel positive, to be with ourselves in positive moments, to be in self-loving action is to, I think, traditionally take myself out for a nice day, a nice lunch, a nice, spa treatment, or, be nice, positive. And what I'm wanting to make a point here is, and this goes back to the expectation that you beautifully languaged in the beginning, which is to be happy, especially at this time of year. The amount of energy it takes when we are rejecting the reality, our emotional reality, when we're not feeling happy, when to be self-loving or self-compassionate in any given moment might for each of us uniquely mean to be with our pain, to be with our grief, to be with our more difficult and upsetting emotions, our loss, to be with all of the unmet needs and the fallout of all of these self-sabotaging behaviors. The amount of energy that takes, because the emotions aren't any less there, even if we've gotten very savvy, as a lot of us have, it putting our attention in all these different places, trying to keep the lid so far shut that they don't leak out. It doesn't mean that they're any less present just because we're not paying attention to them. And the amount of emotional and physiological energy that it takes to be in rejection of our emotional reality, especially around these heavier, more dysregulating, more difficult for most of us emotions, is so great. That we do, not only do we risk our nervous system quite literally entering into that shutdown state, very universal response that will happen when we are consistently overwhelmed and our body isn't physiologically or emotionally supported to navigate that amount of stress. And we will become completely deplete of energy, of ability, of motivation. We'll quote unquote procrastinate. Some of us might even define or hear the definition applied to us that we're lazy. And really, that lack of mobilized energy is more of a function, is the function, I should say, not more, of a depleted physical body, because all of the energy that we are expending, keeping our reality, our emotional reality beneath the surface, not allowing ourselves to co-regulate or to find those supportive moments to actually release this energy. And for a lot of us, the habitual, even identity that we begin to wear for ourselves is overstepping our boundaries, pushing ourselves past our limits, trying to keep up with the endless Christmas list or have the decorations so that the neighbors see a certain thing. And in reality, we're not giving ourselves or our body any time, any moments to replenish ourselves. So when we're talking, and this is another difficult aspect, I think, of the healing journey, not only is it linear, not only do I just immediately start feeling better once I have all of these insights, right? Is that for a lot of us, we have to learn to be present to really difficult truths, to unmet needs, to deep wounds that some of us have been distracting ourselves from because we don't have the physiological ability yet to be present with what's beneath the surface.
I love it.
And that's what comes to mind when I think of self-love too, and the other less intuitive side of it, which it does mean being present to the hard, to the dark.
Beautiful. I wanna let's. I love when we narrate stories because I feel like it connects. Let's talk about this person, which I know a lot of people are gonna relate to this person, who right now is scrolling through social media, comparing her life. Let's talk about a woman, okay? Comparing her life with her friends' life that are now traveling and posting about how they love their family and they're having the time of their life, and and the successes of the year. And she feels she's a failure. Why can't my life be as the other people's lives, and etc. Okay, so you know how it works. And then this person is coming home for Christmas, and the mom is basically criticizing and criticizing her life and her decisions, and why aren't you more productive, and why aren't you helping me? And then the uncle comes and makes a comment about her weight, right? And so all of these things are coming up. She's reflecting back on the year. She feels like she didn't attain not even half of her resolutions. Where does she start in this journey? So I want to kind of talk about this person because I know many people relate. What happens when she realizes she's watching this live and she says, oh my God, I'm her?
I think this is I appreciate this kind of archetype character that you are presenting. I think it's a really, really common one. And the pathway to creating any change, as I kind of touched on a bit earlier, in my opinion, is building that foundation of consciousness, learning how to drop in and observe those moments, whether it's before visit home and there's scrolling and there's that snap comparison. Oh, I don't have, or this must mean there and I'm not. Dropping into our body and becoming present to the sensations, right? How I'm feeling in those moments of scrolling. Am I starting to feel tension, constriction? Am I clenching my jaw? My heart rate starting to race? Am I starting to feel cold and numb and really detached from my body at all? And then beginning to notice what happens next, right? What is it that, do you want to keep scrolling? Do you put the phone down and engage in other self-shaming behavior, right? What happens next? And once we begin to drop in as that state of conscious awareness, we can then continue to apply that foundation. What happens when I go home, right? And mom makes this comment. What am I saying in my mind? How is my body feeling? What am I doing? Same thing with any other moment we're going to navigate. Because from that state of awareness gives us the possibility to begin to make those new choices. The choice in our mind, right? Oh, here comes this comparison. Here comes this criticism, me accepting my mom's perception of me and my weight or whatever it is as truth, or my accomplishments or lack thereof. Let me remove the focus from that thought, maybe that from that belief, what I've come to believe to be true about me and my place in the world. Let me place my focus somewhere else. Let me check in now, maybe with my body, checking in with my breath, with my sensations. Let me maybe tune into the music. There's a song maybe that I like that is playing. So instead of getting looped internally, maybe I can tune into, or maybe there's a candle on and I smell that. Can I tap into my senses and just be consciously present? And if when I did drop into my body, I am noticing those markers of stress, and they're going to impact those three major systems, our muscles and its tension, their tension being the first one, our breath. Do we notice our breath starting to quicken? Are we holding our breath, almost waiting for the next shoe to drop? And our heart rate. Is our heart rate starting to elevate? We're so numb we can barely feel our heart? And noticing those moments of stress are incredibly important, because as I start, my body starts to indicate stress with that tension building, or I'm completely weak and overwhelmed. I've crossed that point of no return, and my muscles feel like I can't get off the couch if I wanted to. As I notice my heart and my breathing similarly quicken or constrict, now I can make some choices, really empowered ones in that moment, to help regulate my body, because my body is playing so much more of a foundational role than many of us are aware in terms of what I do next, how I do navigate that critical comment, whether or not I just react in the same way that I always do, saying something sarcastic back, rolling my eyes, leaving the room, slamming the door, leaving the place, leaving the event entirely, or whether or not I can, as we talked about earlier, right, depersonalize it. This is more of a reflection of how mom feels, perhaps about mom's own body and self-image. Maybe this is where that even critical voice that I caught myself doing when I was shaming myself on social media came from, right? This isn't mine, and I can depersonalize it. And I might be able to now make a choice to show up more responsibly in that moment. Responsively, meaning I can respond. I can leave the conversation if my mom won't stop making the comment, or if there's an uncomfortable conversation that's happening somewhere else. I can stay calm. I can stay grounded. I can choose what it is that happens next. So that's, I think, the framework always. Let me become aware first, right? My mind, what is the running narrative? What is the meaning I'm making of whatever it is that I'm doing, or whatever it is that's happening or not happening around me? How does my body feel in terms of its sensations? And noticing particularly those three main stress markers: my breath, my heart rate, my muscle tension. And then what am I compelled? What is that habitual reaction? And the more observant we are in those moments, now we can begin to tailor not only this character and how they'll want to navigate, right, these reactive moments, or be more responsive in their lives, but each of you listening individually is to your own unique situation, right? Where's a better place for my attention to go right now? Is my body indicating stress, and I can do something consciously and intentionally to calm myself down, my body down, making it more likely that I don't rely on those old habitual patterns, that I show up and keep showing up in the new way that I want to.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love it. And because I feel like self-awareness and self-regulation is huge before we jump to start setting boundaries. And here somebody asked in the questions, how do you set boundaries with that person that makes comments about your body? And for me, it would be something like, let's say it's your mom, because here this person says it's mom. You can validate the fact that for your mom, weight has always been important. So you can say, Mom, I know that for you, weight has always been important, and you notice it a lot. At the same time, so here how I didn't say but, because but usually triggers and invalidates what you said before it. So you would say, at the same time, these comments are very harmful for me. I'm trying to build a positive relationship with my body and my weight. So I'm going to ask you, please, to reserve them from now on. It's very respectful. And if your mom chooses or just doesn't choose, because sometimes she doesn't even choose, it just happens to, she gets mad. That's not your responsibility to save her from her emotions. Your responsibility is to deliver your message in a respectful way. So, and we only can do that if we're regulated ourselves. So that's why everything that Dr. Nicole just talked about self-regulating is key, so we don't add to the drama.
Right. I want to add something for the very natural next moment where mom doesn't change the topic, where that same topic that you very groundedly, respectfully communicate you weren't interested in engaging in brings it back up. Because I want us all to be able to stay in that empowered space. And the reality of it is we can't control someone else and what they do next, whether or not they bring up something that makes us uncomfortable or that we don't want to hear about or engage in. What we can control is what we do, meaning the limit we place on having that conversation. So we make the choice. If and when, likely, that topic comes up again, mom, the way I'm going to empower my side of the street, if you will, in this conversation, I am not going to engage in any conversations about my weight, which means, right, so now playing the tape forward, it comes up again. Mom habitually does what mom does because, again, this is her own filter belief. All she sees, what it means about her and her parenting of you, who knows, not you, right? Now you're empowered because mom's going to do that same thing again. And so what we can do is keep that commitment to ourselves. Change the topic, leave the conversation if it becomes impossible to change the topic, right? Keep that boundary for yourself because we have to go in anticipating, especially it's when these dynamics, things that have always been talked about, roles we've always played, limits we've never had, right? And now we're showing up anew, right? We're going to violate this person's well, what do you mean? We always talked about your weight together. We always shared dieting tips. Now you're not going to have this conversation with me? Or you've always just let me talk about it. You've never said anything. Who's this person now with this new statement? And we have to understand, just like as we were talking about at the beginning, those same habits that are neurobiologically wired into each of us are neurobiologically wired into mom. And chances are this is something much deeper rooted. So in those moments, expect it to come up again and get really clear on what you're willing to engage with in terms of conversation, because we can always keep ourselves in that empowered space by acknowledging and keeping the commitment to, I won't participate. You can keep bringing that up. That will just mean that our conversations will become shortened or less frequent if that's all you can seem to talk about.
I love it. I love it. And each person's way of setting boundaries and the rigidness or flexibility, it's going to be different depending on who you are, how it affects you, your values, your needs, and you can adapt the way you set boundaries or the process of you setting boundaries depending on, again, what you're needing. So for example, for me, I like to do it as a process. I understand how difficult it is for a person to respect a boundary when they've become accustomed of relating with you in a certain manner. So like you said, like, what do you mean? We've always talked about your weight. And of course, like, your mom is completely accustomed. Like, one of the main topics of conversation between us two is your weight. Like, that's how we connect. Now, what I'm going to talk about with you, right? So it's very difficult for mom or whoever you're talking with and you're setting boundaries with to just change from one day to another. So I like to view setting boundaries as a process. And the first thing, again, depending on how rigid it is. If it's very rigid and it's non-negotiable, you would probably like set the consequences straight. But if you are willing to kind of like allow a certain kind of time for your mom to adapt to this new way of relating, you could start with a request. So that would be what I said, kind of like, I understand where you're coming from. At the same time, it's very harmful for me. So I'm going to ask you to please reserve it. Okay. She does it again. So maybe a reminder, remember a day ago we talked about this and you said you were and you said you understood, and well, you did it again. Can you please stop making these comments about my weight? Yes, of course. And then maybe she does it again. Then that third time, maybe it's a time for you to, okay, I can see that it's difficult for you to not make these comments. So in order to protect myself from those comments, I'm just going to retract myself from the conversation or leave the room when these types of comments happen. So that way, she kind of gets this preparation until you actually do actually implement the consequence, and she sees that you're actually not going to flex to how do you say it, I'm kind of Spanglish in my head, but yeah, you're not gonna retract your boundary from the situation because she just keeps irrespecting it. And that could be with anything. It could be a family member that gets drunk and makes inappropriate comments. You can tell him, when you drink, usually this happens and it affects me. So I'm going to ask you to please not make those comments. And if you keep making them, I'm just going to distance myself for the time that you are under the influence. And it could be, what other type of boundaries you see a lot in this season?
I think, yeah, conversational ones are a really common one. Topics, especially I think around deep-rooted values, when value-driven topics come up, I think that is really common. Another one that's coming to mind as I'm saying that, I hear myself say that, because there's, I think, a lot of shared meal time opportunities. I think that there can not only be commentary on physical looks, but commentary on consumption choices, what you like to eat, what you're not eating, whether or not you're consuming alcohol. I think a lot of that can be because a lot of, especially around the holidays, shared moments are had around meals. I think giving a lot of observation opportunity and then opinion. And I think some of us, make decisions to change lifestyle habits that maybe some of us have ingrained for years. And maybe they have been points of connection. And just sharing personally for me, coming from a very Italian American cultured household where food was bonding and there was, certain diet, if you will, that we all more or less followed from as long as I can remember. And somewhere in my 30s, I started to just shift and change the way that I cared for my body, which meant, consuming a different nutritional profile. It meant, moving and resting and doing different things with my body. And then I would go home. And because this is the space where not only were we shared in our gathering, there was a felt sense of connection. And now I have different dietary requirements, if you will, or I'm choosing to bring different, meat plates and partaking in those instead of other ones. And a lot of pride would come, especially from my mom in particular, who really struggled to connect emotionally. One of her main ways of caring for myself, my siblings, and my dad, my family itself, was through food. So now there was a lot of not only just, oh, these habits are different and not what I'm used to. For my mom, at least, there was a lot of deep-rooted wounding. Oh, you don't want the way I'm caring for you in the way that I know how to care for you anymore. So I think a lot of those moments can come up for us in terms of getting clear on what our boundaries are in terms of what we consume or don't consume. And if we do want to uphold, our new lifestyle choices in these moments where we'll be sharing time and schedule and meals, and then learning how to respectfully, I think, communicate. I love even your kind of process model of giving people a couple communications before we just completely surprise them with this new switch or shift or new way of being, kind of giving that warm up period. And then, of course, I want to acknowledge it's really a flowing practice. When I first started to discover that I have no boundaries, it took me a while to find out where my limits are, to learn how to assertively and not aggressively communicate them or passive aggressively communicate them. I erred on both sides a lot, and finding a more comfortable, this all came, I think, beautifully full circle as I got more connected to myself, more grounded in my own self-trust and my own ability to use my discretion and nuance in certain moments and communicate my needs. And as all of that, or as I built a stronger muscle, I should say, in all of those areas, then I was able to more flexibly use and continue to create the boundaries that I need and modify and shift and change them with, I think, the evolving organism that we are in relationship with someone else. So I just wanted to give language to all of that middle stage.
Yeah.
When we don't know where our boundaries are, when we communicate them too aggressively or not enough, and then we're not getting the result that we want, when people are shocked when we're behaving in new ways, and really giving the dynamic itself time to reorganize as we're shifting and changing ourselves.
Beautiful. I love it. I turned at the beginning the comments off because I was getting distracted, but I always love to finish my lives with reading what takeaways, like just one takeaway that you got from this conversation. So I'm going to turn that on, and if everybody that's here can write and comment in what was the biggest takeaway from today's conversation. How are you going to self-love through the end of the year after this conversation? And so we can share ours while they come up with theirs. What would be yours?
Actually, this beautifully applies. Having just this book, the new book came out on November 28th, and I've had a lot of book promo, book events. I had all the opportunity to do a bit of a book tour, to travel some different places and meet the community. And so saying that to say, I've been, as I often is the case, when I have a lot to do, I think this applies to the holiday conversation, somewhere down the list, self-care for me falls so quickly. I do all of those conditioned habits to show up in all of these ways of performing for other people and to serve and to, do all of these exciting opportunities becomes my priority. And when that happens, not only do I see in my own relationship with myself and my own relationship with my loved ones around me a regression or kind of that falling back into old habits and patterns, with that lack of tending to my body the way that I need to, making sure that I'm moving it and eating the way that I need to be eating and sleeping, and taking those moments to do a bit of breath work or those calm grounding practices that for me are foundational. Not only do those interpersonal and emotional habits, feeling more overwhelmed and reacting in those old ways, come to the surface, oftentimes what happens for me is my physical limits have gotten crossed. And so what my self-love, self-care plan for the next 2 weeks is going to be a lot of downtime, a lot of rest. I have cleared out the to-do list. I'm going to be really focusing on reconnecting with my body and taking all of those moments to restore and replenish that I need.
I love it, and I relate so much. For me it would be, I have 3 kids, and 2 are 6 years old, 1 is 1 year old. And I feel one of the most important ways that I can connect with myself, my inner child, and give myself love is to engage with them with play, like literally play with them and mindfully engage in that play. Because sometimes as adults, where they're like kind of acting to play because they want our attention, but our mind is actually in what's gonna happen next, like after the play. I need to do all of these things in my to-do list. So we're not actually there. And I feel like they know it. They kind of know it. They can feel it. And so for me, I'm going to definitely be a lot more mindful when I'm playing, to be 100% present with them. Yes.
What a beautiful gift that is, truly, Stephanie, to your children. I really appreciate you acknowledging those small moments of presence, of play, and how regulating and necessary they are, not only just for our children, for us as an adult human who still has those needs to be present and connected, especially with our little ones, and to have a moment of joyful ease or play.
Beautiful. And I see a lot of fires coming up, people relating. Okay, so I'm going to read some of them before closing. And before reading, the book behind Nicole, Dr. Nicole, is her new book. I have it at home, and because I usually have at home the books that I'm reading, so I don't have it in the office. But it's beyond amazing. So much wisdom, so much healing. If somebody here doesn't have it at home, I really recommend it. I think it's one of the best books you can read, specifically starting a new year. So I know you can find it in Amazon, right? Yeah. It's probably in the link in your bio. So I'm going to read some here. Be present. I'll allow myself to feel. That's beautiful. Coming back to my body, having more compassion to myself, starting with simple goals to avoid self-sabotage. Beautiful. What else? It's okay to walk away from a family member. Definitely, it's okay. It's hard and it's okay. It's sometimes necessary. Physically taking care of my body. There's so many. Treat myself the way I want to be treated. Beautiful. Check with myself constantly, allowing myself to be compassionate with others as well. Beautiful. There's so many. I'm so glad all of you were able to listen to this conversation. I hope you can really build on this conversation and take all these takeaways and actually apply it in your own life. And I thank you, Nicole, for accepting this invitation and for connecting with my community and for me to be able to connect with yours.
Of course, Stephanie, thank you again for the light that you are in this world, for giving me this opportunity not only to connect with you, connect with your beautiful community. I'm seeing so many of you who have already purchased the book, who are going to purchase it. Truly, thank you for that support. It is books, if we really just want to be objective about it, and you helping me out when they come out to purchase them, that keeps giving me the opportunity to put this work out into the world. So I truly mean it is you out there who is continuing to allow this to happen for me, which is just such a passion of mine. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you all for healing as we are, as I truly believe this is going to create the change that so many of us are looking for, especially at this time of year where I think there's so much of a focus on change. And if this conversation maybe just helped create a bit of self-awareness and self-compassion that comes along with that awareness, then I think we did our jobs here today, Stephanie.
So I'm gonna save the live. I'm gonna share, put you as a collaborator just in case you wanna put it in your profile as well. So anybody who wants to re-listen it, it's gonna be saved. Also, from my community that only speaks Spanish, I'm gonna put the subtitles so you can understand it in Spanish. Sending so much love, and let's continue to grow. Mwah. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.